Welcome back, survivor. If you can hear this, it means you're still alive. This is Jack's Nightmares, and this is your next story. The sun dragged itself over the horizon without any warmth, a pale smear behind a low blanket of cloud that turned the channel into dull steel. The water was restless, short choppy waves slapping against the hull, and every time the boat rolled, the diesel engine gave a tired groan, like it resented being out this early. We were a mile off the breakwater, close enough to see the masts packed along the marina, but far enough that the town itself sat blurred in a haze of salt and damp air. Mick had one hand on the wheel, hat pulled down low, his gaze locked on the harbour mouth the way a man watches a door he isn't sure he'll be welcome walking through. Baz and I were stowing the last of the nets, the ropes damp and cold against our hands. Kim was at the stern, rinsing down the deck with the hose, but the pump kept choking on air and coughing more spit than water. The gulls followed in lazy arcs, screaming half-heartedly, and I kept waiting for the usual radio chatter to kick in. It hadn't. Not one word since first light. It was the kind of silence that doesn't feel natural, the kind that sits heavy, like the whole harbour was holding its breath. I grabbed the handset and called it in. Coastguard, Coastguard, this is Red Mackerel, inbound for the Fish Key. Any traffic for Sutton? Static. A faint hiss and the ghost of a carrier tone, like someone had keyed up on the other end, but never found the words. I tried again, slower this time, letting my voice stretch across the water. For a few seconds, there was nothing. And then a reply came back, sharp and flat, like the voice had been stripped of anything human. A woman reading straight from a sheet. Inbound vessels. Standoff outside harbour limits. Repeat. Standoff. Temporary quarantine in effect. Await instructions on Channel 16. I lowered the handset and looked at Mick. He didn't say anything, just stared past me at the shoreline where smoke hung low in the sky, thin but visible against the grey. It wasn't the kind of smoke that came from a chimney or a flare stack. This was messier, heavier, spreading itself out in a slow smear above the naval base, like a greasy thumbprint. Baz noticed it too and frowned, muttering something about drills or an accident, but Mick's jaw had tightened. He didn't believe that. Neither did I. The gulls had gone quiet behind us, riding the updrafts without a sound, and I found myself straining to hear anything else at all. The horns, the cranes, the usual clatter of a harbour waking up. There was nothing but the engine's low rumble, the restless water, and the distant hiss of static still bleeding faintly from the radio speaker. Something wasn't right, and even the sea seemed to know it. Baz laughed, not because it was funny, just to have a sound. Quarantine for what, lads? Bad cod? Kim didn't smile. She tightened the strap on her knife and said she wanted to get her kid from school by lunch. That took the fizz out of Baz. Nobody joked after that. I watched the smoke and thought about how fast news moves on a harbour. 2 minutes from a ferry deck to a bar stool, and then the whole quay knows before the kettle boils. Today it felt like the rumours had gotten here ahead of the tide. Mick turned us slowly, keeping the bow steady on the gap in the breakwater. "We go in," he said, voice soft, certain. "Ice is shot, fuel's low, and that hold won't keep till tomorrow. We'll tie up, get the situation, keep our heads." He always said that. Keep your head. He said it at sea in black water, and he said it over spilled coffee on the bunk. It worked most days. I nodded, because I wanted to believe him, and also because the smell of diesel was thin and the gauge wasn't lying. The closer we got, the more I saw the wrongness. Coastguard rib at the mouth, engines off, crew standing and staring in towards the Barbican. A police launch tucked under the wall. Lifeboat not where it should be. On the quay, a ragged crowd that had no reason to be there at that hour. Families with bags. Old boys with their dogs on short leads. A forklift parked sideways like it had tried to block something and lost interest. Somebody shouted, and it wasn't the cheerful abuse you hear when a trawler bumps a fender. It had a jag to it. A voice boomed across the water from a loudhailer on the police launch. "Vessels, do not attempt to moor. Return to sea and await instruction." Mick cupped his hands around his mouth and yelled back that we were short on fuel. The officer didn't answer. Over by the marina entrance, A ferry edged out and then stopped dead. People on the top deck waved and screamed. I don't use that word lightly. It wasn't the drunk singing you hear on a Friday. It was a raw, rope saw sort of sound that makes you glance over your shoulder. And then I saw the first of them. He looked like a bloke who'd lost a fight with a stairwell. Shirt soaked, face wrong in a way I couldn't place until he turned his head and the jaw just hung. He walked into a running gull and didn't flinch when the beak nicked him. He drifted like tide-moved weed. People backed away, and then someone tripped and a bag spilled, and an orange rolled in a perfect slow arc. The man's head turned to the orange, not to the person. That's when my stomach did a tight little fold. Not fear, just the sense that the pattern was wrong. Baz leaned on the rail. "What's wrong with him?" he asked, quiet for once. Nobody answered because another one came into view over by the fish market doors, and this one moved quicker, like his legs had remembered something his head hadn't. He fell into a run that wasn't a proper run, all heel and lurch, like a bad dream sprint where the ground won't meet your feet. The crowd reacted like a flock splitting, messy and loud, and the police launch gunned its engine and swung between us and the quay. "Back us off," I said, but Mick didn't. He feathered the throttle and slid us closer to the pile moorings where we always tied. Habit is a chain. Kim tied a bowline one-handed and stood with the gaff, eyes narrow, jaw set. She had that look she wore when a weather window closed and the fish came up thin. No panic, just planning the next move. A small lad on the quay tried to jump from the pontoon to the wall, fell, and hit the water. The people next to him froze, then shouted, then froze again, because something under the pontoon moved in a way water shouldn't. I saw fingers, pale, grey-silted fingers. They rose from under the pontoon, opened and closed like crabs testing a pot lid. The lad splashed and clawed at the ropes, and a woman knelt and reached, and 2 sets of hands got him under the armpits, and he came up coughing, and the fingers below scrabbled and slid away. A man looked down. He didn't lean too far. He'd done that dance before. He knew how fast a harbour takes a fool. He crossed himself, quick and furtive. I hadn't seen that in years down here. "Moored or not, we're not easing in," Mick said, and his hands did a small tremble that made the wheel chatter. He held it tighter and breathed through his nose like a bull about to commit. "Take the lines ready, but don't throw till I say." That saved us. A surge of people hit the pontoon, and if we'd been tied, they would have swarmed us. Some had bags, some had nothing. One had a cat in a carrier with tape around it. The tape had a floral pattern. I noticed that, and then wished I hadn't, because it made it real, in a soft way that hurt. A new voice came on the radio, not Coastguard. A man from the base across the water, by the sound. "All craft, this is naval security. Remain outside the harbour. Repeat, remain outside. There is an infection ashore. Do not pick up persons from the quay." Infection. He used it like a fact. Not a maybe, not a rumour. Mick turned his head and looked at me, the way he did when a net snagged something expensive. I shrugged and felt a bitterness at the back of my tongue like old tea. Infection meant rules. Rules meant someone would shout at us if we broke them. Problem was, shouting didn't stop a tide. "Kim," I said, "get the flares handy." She had them out before I finished. Red sticks, rubber bands, the weight of certainty. Baz put on gloves and said, too brisk, that he would handle the lines if we had to run for the inner basin. He said it like a joke and then didn't smile again. The ferry that had nosed out gave a long blast and started reversing back in, and for a second that looked like hope to the people packed along the marina rails. Hands went up him. People started to wave like it was a parade. Then a man on the ferry's lower deck vaulted a gate and landed on the pontoon. He limped. A woman tried to stop him. He shoved her without looking. He dropped to his hands and knees for a moment, and then stood and went for the nearest person, with a movement that made my teeth clench. Not speed. Intent. He grabbed a girl by the wrist and bit her before anyone understood the shape of the scene. The shock went through the crowd like a breaker. A policeman fired into the air. The sound cracked and bounced off the brick and glass and sent a flock of pigeons up like grey confetti. We were close enough to hear words now. Keep back, I said. He's got my Hannah. Water, get in the water, and no, don't, please, don't. All the useless sentences people say out of habit when the world changes shape. Kim lifted the gaff and set her feet. Mick brought us broadside to the pontoon, and then swung away fast enough to make the gulls skid in our wake. He would not tie in there. He had made that choice. He cut a line that we had used for 6 years with a flick of his knife. It felt like cutting something in the chest. "In a basin," he said. "Market side. If we can get the doors down, we sit tight till this shakes out." That phrase, "shakes out," as if this was a squall with a sunny patch behind it. I went for bitterness again, and it was still there, sour and real. "Baz, coil those warps. Kim, flare if anyone comes off the pontoon towards us." She nodded, face white with salt streaks and spray and something else. Not fear, something colder. As we angled for the inner basin, a man in a small dayboat motored out from a side pontoon, wife and girl in the bow. He waved madly, eyes wide, and pointed at our stern. I didn't look back. I looked forward because that's what keeps you off rocks. He came alongside anyway, and shouted that his engine was missing and could we lend fuel. His girl had a plaster on her knee with cartoon characters. She stared at me with that blank child stare that hasn't decided what to be yet. I saw a smear on her sleeve and told myself it was ketchup. I told myself that very hard. Mick didn't answer the man because 2 more came running down the pontoon ahead of us, and one fell under the gap where the pontoon meets the quay, and the other tried to pull him and started getting dragged down too. The sound of their shoes on wet timber stuck in my ear. Thump, skid, thump. The dayboat tried to get in to help. The stern swung, and the prop bit a fender and bounced him away like a toy. Kim fired a flare at an angle between us all, and it sizzled and hissed and threw red smoke and made everyone pause. That pause saved the mother and girl. The men by the gap were gone. The water showed me a scrap of bright shirt and then nothing. The inner basin wasn't calm. It had a pressed-in sort of crowd, like the last day before Christmas, but without the lights. Fish boxes stacked, vans skewed at stupid angles, a bucket rolling to its own mind. I threw a line to a bollard and had to yank it back because hands grabbed for it like heaving ropes on a lifeboat. "Back!" I shouted. "Back, or we'll take your fingers off." That old harbor threat felt rotten in my mouth when I said it to a dad with a baby strapped to his chest. He backed up anyway, because he looked at Kim's eyes and saw she meant it. We came in hot, bumped the key, and Mick dropped the throttle to idle. I jumped. Boots hit concrete. Weight went in the knees, but I stayed up. I threw 2 turns and hauled, and Kim tossed the stern line with a clean arc that would have made her old man proud if he wasn't sitting at home wondering why the news had stopped. Baz got the fenders down late, and we scuffed paint. Nobody cared. We needed a wall under our feet and doors over our heads. The market shutters were down on one side and half up on the other. Inside, I saw faces I knew from mornings that smelled of ice and lemon bleach. Brenda from stall 4, with the scar on her thumb where the slicer bit. Leon, who sells crab, heavy brow, soft voice. Paul, who does deliveries, never shuts up. All of them now looking like extra light had been sucked out of the room, even though the fluorescents buzzed overhead. Leon waved us in fast. Get in, and pull it down," he said, pointing at the half-open shutter. His hand shook just once and then stopped. He had decided to be useful. We ducked under. Kim last with the gaff held low. The shutter rattled down, and someone threw a bar through the lower lugs. Inside the market, the temperature hit me and made me think of winter. Ice bins half full, a smell of fish that was not bad yet, just honest. The normal noises were wrong. No banter. No old radio in the corner, thin and cheerful. Just breathing, and the drip of melt. I could hear my boots squeak and wished I couldn't. "Phones?" Brenda asked. "Mine's dead. Landline's dead. What do we do?" She looked at Mick when she asked. He didn't want that look, but he took it. "We bar the doors. We count what we've got. And we set a watch," he said. His voice sat in the rafters and didn't come back. Paul said his van was outside with the keys in it and that we could run to the supermarket 2 streets up and get tins. He said it too fast, like he wanted someone to tell him no. I told him no anyway. "We hold for an hour," I said. "Make a plan worth walking on." Leon had a forklift. He fired it up and the noise cheered me in a stupid way. Simple engine, simple job. He nudged pallets up against the shutters and dropped a crate of ice against the side door, then killed the engine and listened. He was listening for the same thing I was. That wet, stop-start shuffle and the scrape of something that doesn't care if its skin is cut. Too quiet out there. I would have liked the gulls to come back and get loud, even if it meant cleaning bird filth off the awnings later. Baz stood apart, rolling his shoulders. He hadn't said much since the ferry. He looked at his hand and flexed it. "You all right?" I asked. He nodded. "Something caught me when I was coiling. Just a nick." He showed me a scrape, no more than a cat scratch. Red line with a little dirt in it. I told him to wash it, proper suds, then wipe with spirit. He did it without arguing, which worried me more than the cut. Baz never did anything without a story attached. A thump came at the shutter, not a knock, a blunt body thump, the sort that has no manners in it. Everyone turned their heads in the same slow sweep, like we'd rehearsed. Leon palmed the forklift's key but didn't start it. We all listened. The thump came again, followed by the drag of fabric on aluminium. A smear pushed under the gap like wet paint, and then stopped. I realized that the fork pallet we'd dropped left a 6-inch space at the base. Perfect to see 2 feet in cheap trainers pause, splay a little, then steady. Those feet didn't belong to a runner or a copper or a chancer. The posture was wrong. Kim moved to the gap and tapped the concrete with the butt of the gaff. Once. The feet reacted with a small twitch and then stood still again. Whoever was attached to them didn't kneel, didn't peer, didn't plead, just pressed forward, steady, like a tide that had found the line of least resistance. I pulled a fish box to the gap and slid it into place. It scraped loud, and the feet jerked hard against the shutter in reply. Paul swore in a soft way that barely counted as swearing and grabbed the next box to help. We kept busy because busy keeps the mind from wandering down dark alleys. Brenda counted knives and wrapped the good ones in cloth. Leon stacked crates into a tidy barricade with those small, fussy adjustments that mean control. Mick sorted flares and handed one each to the adults and then to the older lad in the corner with the skater hoodie who had come in with his mum. The lad took the flare like a medal and then set it down carefully and patted it like a dog. Kim found a first aid kit and laid it open like a book we might actually read this time. I checked the back. The loading door had 2 sliding bolts and 1 padlock that had always been for show. I made it real by ramming a hook through the hasp and twisting it until the metal groaned. The noise brought another thump from outside, this time on the back. I pictured the alley out there with its dumpsters, an old mackerel smell, and the little chalk pictures the kids drew on summer days, when they were bored, while their mums haggled for haddock. I pictured the chalk under a boot now, grinding colors into paste. The radio crackled again. Coastguard, more human now, not reading. All stations, all stations. Infection confirmed ashore. Do not attempt rescue ashore. Remain at sea. We are coordinating evacuation of essential vessels only. Essential meant naval, maybe tugs. Not us. Mick turned it off and put the set under the counter because the words weren't helping anyone in this room. Kim raised an eyebrow. So we're the wrong sort of boat today. Mick said nothing. He sat on an upturned box and rubbed his forearms the way he did when thinking. We set a watch at the front shutter, 2 at a time. I took first with Kim. The others found jobs. Paul talked and talked about supply runs until Leon told him, quiet and kind, to pipe down and save his breath. Baz paced, then stopped, then paced. He looked like a man who keeps waiting for his hand to stop tingling after an electric fence. He said he was fine. We accepted that because nothing we could do in that moment would make it truer. A banging started up towards the ferry point, metal on metal, unrhythmic. Then a scream that died fast, as if someone had remembered a rule about being quiet, or had been made quiet. Brenda held her rosary under the counter, thumb flicking beads. I'd never seen her pray in the market. It felt private, like walking in on someone changing. I looked away. Kim didn't. She nodded once, like a salute. Small kindnesses had weight today. We mapped the place in our heads quick. Ice room through the back, spirals of pipe on the wall humming a little. Stairs to the mezzanine where spare polystyrene boxes lived. A hatch to the roof that nobody used because the ladder bites your hands. Kim volunteered to check the roof anyway. She didn't make speeches. She just slung the gaff across her back with a length of rope and went. I followed because 2 is the right number when you don't know what waits at the top of a ladder. Roof gave us height and wind. It smelt of tar and dead gull fluff and the sweet stale perfume of the market. From up there, the harbour spread out like a map missing its legend. Smoke over the base, yes. The ferry docked, yes. The crowd thinned at the edges and thickened at the gates. Sirens wound up, wound down, didn't die. Moving shapes along the quay that didn't hold themselves like healthy people. The RNLI boathouse sat stubborn and neat, door down. I wanted to see the door open, and a crew in orange kit running with those big easy strides. It stayed shut. Kim crawled to the lip and peered down at the alley behind the market. 2 bodies. One face down, one sitting against the wall like a man taking a late break. Both wrong-colored. The one sitting lifted his head as if he'd heard a name he used to answer to. He didn't speak. He did a little mouth movement like a baby trying to remember milk. Kim didn't wave, didn't test him. She backed away from the edge on elbows like a soldier in a film. She and I went back inside without telling the others what exactly we'd seen. We told them enough. Time stretched in that room. Not lazy, tight. We did little jobs that mattered. We ate bread meant for the end of the day and didn't taste it. Baz drank water and stared at the door as if he had left something important on the other side. He made a small sound once, like when you pull a splinter. I stepped over. He showed me the scratch again. The skin around it looked mean. Not swollen big, just mean. I cleaned it again with spirit that bit the air. He thanked me and squeezed my elbow like an old mate who has lent a tenner. That shook me more than anything else he'd done. By early afternoon, the market had more people in it than it should. Word of a safe door spreads fast. A couple from the dockyard came in, faces ash grey under red noses. A young woman with a trolley full of nothing, just habit. She pushed that empty metal rattle round and round until Brenda asked her to put it aside and sit. She did, and then she slept sitting up, mouth open, breath whistling a little. A man in a suit stood very straight near the ice and explained to Mick that the council would sort this by evening. Mick looked at him and said nothing. The man heard the silence and shut up. At 3, we tried the back office TV with a coat hanger aerial. We got a picture that flickered and rolled and showed a presenter with eyes like she'd been crying and then powdered. She spoke about a public health emergency, about staying at home, about not traveling, about reports of violent behavior. She didn't say zombies, obviously. She didn't say undead. She didn't say the walking dead. She looked down twice at something off camera and then straightened her shoulders each time like a swimmer on a cold morning. Then the picture froze and the sound burped and we had grey snow. Paul tried again with the supply idea. "I can do it," he said. "I know the back ways. I'll be in and out. Tins, batteries, nappies. All the boring stuff that keeps a day from turning on you." Leon crossed his arms. "On your own?" Paul nodded. "No." I said it plain. He sagged, then rallied. "2 then," he bargained. "2's fair." He looked at me and Mick, and then at Baz. Baz stepped forward, jaw set, and I almost said yes out of habit. Then I looked at his hand and chose Kim. She didn't argue. She grabbed a tote bag and a short boat hook and said we would be 10 minutes. Mick stared at the shutter. "Lock the small door behind you," he said. "If you see numbers, you leave the bags and run." He didn't have to say the next part. We nodded. The alley out back had got quieter. The sitting man was gone. The chalk had a smear. The dumpsters housed a smell I was used to, and under it, a new edge that I would have recognized in any country on earth. We moved low and fast, the way you move when teens lob fireworks for a laugh. Kim made us pause at each corner and look. She was fearless and careful. I liked that mix. We went 2 streets up to a little shop with bars on the window. The door was open. The bell didn't ring because someone had taken it off months ago after complaining about the constant ding. The owner lay behind the counter. His eyes were open and filmed. His hands were empty. No gore, no mess, just wrong. We didn't say a word. We took tins, batteries, bottled water, nappies. because Paul had been right about boring things. We took torches. We left money on the counter out of habit and then looked at it and left it there anyway, because if the world still had rules after this, I wanted to be on the right side of them. On the way out, a soft tapping came from the stockroom. Tap, tap, like a blind man finding walls. We didn't check it. The rule was 2 minutes and home. We made it back to the market and Leon slid the door behind us and shut the bolts and kissed the keys like a saint medal. We fed people. We counted flares. We added 2 carving knives and a filleting blade to the pile, and gave the fillet knife to Brenda because I had seen her use one like a surgeon. The banging on the shutters followed a rhythm now, the wrong sort of rhythm. Someone outside had decided the market was a drum. Brenda flinched and then stilled, and then put plugs in the young woman's ears very gently. The girl slept on, open-mouthed. It made me both angry and fond. Life does that at the same time. By late afternoon, the tide had turned, and so had the mood in the room. People wanted decisions. One father asked whether we planned to use the boats. When Mick said no, a man in high-vis who had not lifted a finger all day said something about cowards. He said it mild, with a nasty curl under it. Kim looked at him and asked him to come help move boxes. He refused. Leon watched that and put the forklift key in his pocket. Small shifts. You learn to see them on a harbor. Trouble doesn't always shout, it sidles. Baz had gone quiet in a new way. The scratch on his hand had a hard line around it. His eyes didn't hold focus long. He kept blinking as if he had salt in them. He came and stood too close to me and asked what time it was, and then asked again 2 minutes later. I took Mick aside. We didn't use the word. We looked at Baz, and then at the room, and then at the little store cupboard with the mops. We put a chair in there and a bucket and told Baz to rest in the coolest place because he'd worked like a mule. He smiled at that. "You old soft sods," he said. But he went in, and that's what mattered. Dusk crawled in, not dramatic, just a slow dimming. The shutters whispered with the touch of wind and the occasional scrape. We put torches on the counter but didn't turn them on. The streetlights outside flicked and died and tried again, and then gave up. Someone cried quietly in the stall across from us. A small, steady sound that did not beg for comfort. Brenda handed her a tissue, and then put a hand on her shoulder and left it there. No words. Words would have popped the seam. At full dark, things changed. Sound travels at night. We heard boats moving wrong in the marina, bumping into pontoons like drunk geese. We heard a car hit something soft and then reverse and hit it again, and then stall. We heard the first proper crowd noise from the Barbican direction, a rising note, like a football chant with the tune pulled out. Then firelight flicked on the ceiling in a way that meant flame outside, not fluorescent flicker. Leon squeezed the forklift key. "If that comes this way, we go out the back and across the roofs," he said. He had already made the route in his head, counting steps. The mop's cupboard door thumped. Once, twice. Baz spoke in a slow voice. "Lads," he said. He sounded drunk without the good part. "It's hot in here." Kim opened the door a crack and passed him a bottle. His hand hesitated and then took it. He drank and coughed and then laughed. It was not a Baz laugh. It was too careful. He put the bottle down on the floor in a way that made me think of a glass on a gravestone. We shut the door again and braced it with a crate and a punnet of cheap lemons, because that was what the world had given us to work with. The man in high-vis tried the side door quietly. Kim was there. She didn't speak. She showed him the fillet knife and a look that has stopped bigger men than him. He murmured about fresh air and then backed off. He drifted to Paul and whispered. Paul shook his head and kept his eyes on the floor. He was not brave, but he was not stupid. He had a daughter asleep against his hip, and that had stiffened his spine. We needed a plan for morning. The room had that brittle edge it gets at 2 a.m. on a winter trawl, when the gear is misbehaving and the clock seems to run in circles. Mick said we leave on the morning tide if the quay is clear enough to move. He wanted to run around the breakwater and anchor out where the chain lifts and drops, and nothing comes at you from behind without telling the water first. He spoke about fuel with numbers that matched the gauge, and about wind with phrases I trusted. He didn't use the word safe. He used the word try. That was honest. We split the night into watches. 2 at the front, 1 at the back, 1 floating. I took back first with the boat hook and a torch. The alley had rested into a rhythm now. Soft shuffles, occasional small impacts like a head testing a door because it remembers the shape of a knob without the purpose. Once, near midnight, something snuffled under the door and then thumped away as if offended by the metal. I pictured a dog, but I didn't lift the bolt. I thought of the cat in the carrier and how tape can hold a door till the world forgets you. That image did me in for a minute. I breathed and watched the bolt and counted. At some point, the smell in the room picked up that hospital tang you get from too much spirit and not enough window. People shifted and murmured and settled. Sleep came like a mugging, fast and messy. I sat on a box and rested my eyes for a blink and woke to Kim touching my shoulder. She had the gaff across her chest like a sash. "My turn," she whispered. Whispering felt respectful, like taking your hat off in a church. I handed her the torch and went to check on Baz. He had wedged himself back in the corner under a mop head. He looked past me. He did not see me. His lips moved, slow, like he was chewing old bread. I called his name, quiet. He answered a fraction of a beat too late, like a radio with a delay. "All good, mate," he said. The words lined up fine, but the tone was wrong. I set a bottle by his foot and backed out and braced the door again, and stood there, hand on the frame, thinking of the list of sensible, horrible things. Kim came and stood beside me without asking. We didn't speak the list. We both knew the top 3 items. At 4, the firelight on the ceiling brightened and then fell away, like a torch beam sweeping. The banging on the front shutter stopped for a full minute and then started again, harder, from lower down, like more of them had come. We needed a trick. Leon found it. He started the forklift and smashed the horn. The blast filled the market, rattled ice, made the baby cry, and sent the banging into a stutter. He kept doing it in bursts, counting, making a pattern. I stepped to the side door and did the same with a steel pan, metal on metal, then let it ring and die. We were training them like gulls to look the wrong way. When the sky ahead of dawn went lighter by a thumbshade, we moved. Mick lifted the front shutter just enough to see through. 2 of them right there, pressing in, faces scuffed, shirts stiff with old seawater. One had a bit of net around his wrist like a bracelet. He didn't notice the pain that had put it there. Mick dropped the shutter and looked at me and Kim. "Back door," he said. "Roof to our boat. No pontoon if we can help it." Leon took the forklift to the back and tickled the crate aside 1/2 an inch. He looked me dead on. "You take the key," he said. "If I don't come, you go." I didn't argue. Argument wastes time and gives fate ideas. We peeled the back door open on a hinge that wept noise. The alley gave us damp air and a silence like wetted cloth. 2 of them stood 10 yards down, turned away, heads canted. Something had pulled their attention to the street. Maybe our horn trick, maybe the ferry horn that gave a little lost bleat then cut off. We slipped out. 6 of us for the first run. Me, Mick, Kim, Leon, Paul with his girl, and Brenda because she moved like someone with a job. We left the door ajar and a crate ready, and we moved. Kim went first up the fire escape ladder to the roof of the next building. She climbed with her boots straight and clean, no scrape, no jangle. The rest of us followed, passing the girl up hand to hand. Her face was damp and serious. She did not fuss. She wrapped her arms around my neck with a little dry strength and then let go in the same breath. The roof tar gave underfoot with a sticky sigh. The gulls had not come back yet. I missed their rude chatter like I miss old mates who've moved away. From the roof we went down the other side onto the market's awnings, then to a drain pipe, then to the narrow walk that ran behind the stalls. We made shapes I had never made in that space, like a city fox learning a new route. Kim landed on a bollard light as you like. Leon followed and knocked his elbow and didn't swear. We got to the quay edge above our boat. She sat patient, fenders buffed, lines tight. Home, if you squinted and lied to yourself. The pontoon between the quay and our deck had 3 of them on it, feet at odd angles, one hand draped over the side in a private cuddle with the water. We didn't use the pontoon, we used rope. Leon's forklifts and cranes had left him with hands that could throw. He dropped a line across the gap, and I caught it with the boat hook and looped it around the cleat. We made a little bridge with 2 planks we had cached for painting days. I took the girl, knees bent, body low, and crossed first. The plank bowed and groaned a little, and I whispered, "Steady, old girl," which I have said to everything from engines to crusty rolls. The 3 on the pontoon lifted their heads at the word, not because they knew it, because I had broken the quiet. They turned slow, then tried to hurry, when the shapes of us made sense to whatever inside them was still working. Their speed was not sprint, not yet, but it had that awful mindless commitment that makes the skin on your arms want to crawl. Kim took the first with the gaff, hook under the chin, pull, release. No heroics, just fishmonger moves turned sideways. Leon swung the second by the collar and levered it, no more effort than flipping a crate. The third got his fingers on the plank. I stamped, heel down, and he slipped, legs falling to the water, hands still clamped. His grip stayed while the sea took the rest. I kicked his knuckles. Not my proudest note, needed doing. We got the first group aboard. Leon went back with Paul for the girl's mum, and Brenda refused to stay and waited at the roof edge, knife ready, looking like someone's grandmother who has run out of patience with nonsense. Mick and I cast off bow and stern and pushed off with boat hooks, slow, quiet, the way you do when coming off a lee wall. The engine coughed alive, and the note sounded too loud, like we had shouted in a church. Shapes along the quay turned. We eased out anyway because standing still was the worst plan on offer. Paul and Leon came running along the awning edge with the mum between them. She limped, legs stiff, blood on her trouser, not gushing, just there. We did not ask how, no time. They dropped to the plank. Kim held it. The 3 of them crossed while the water made greedy sucking sounds at the pontoon edges. I kept the bow touched into the fended wall just enough for the plank to hold. My hands did familiar things. The world tried to be new and I ignored it. We pushed off and drifted clear. The view across the basin made my throat tighten in a way that had nothing to do with coughs. People moved like lost cattle. A man tried to start his outboard without the kill cord in. He yanked so hard he fell back and knocked his head and lay blinking at the sky, stunned by his own stupidity. A woman threw a suitcase at a catamaran and missed, and the case burst in a fountain of shirts that looked festive for half a second and then sank. 2 of the infected shuffled along the quay's edge and turned left and turned right as if an invisible hand had lost the script. "Outside," Mick said, slow and quiet. He kept us in the lee of buildings until we saw the marina mouth and the open water beyond. The police launch sat across the entrance as if to block, but it had draped a line and gone quiet. Nobody aboard. The rib from earlier ghosted, rope trailing, bow nicked. We went by at 5 knots and didn't touch a thing. I threw a glance at the base. The smoke had gone from smear to stripe. A helicopter lifted and hung, and then went inland fast like a man late for a thing he had promised not to be late for. At the breakwater we made our first real decision. Out or in and round to Corsand. In meant people. Out meant fuel and weather and the big cold indifference of the sea. We went out. Mick didn't blink. He took us past the lighthouse, white against grey, and then pointed at a spot off the red buoy where the depth was good for anchoring and the tide didn't scud you into trouble. He kept his voice level, telling me chain marks and bearings like we were teaching a lad new tricks. He did that for himself, not for me. I let him. We dropped the pick. The chain ran with that rattling purr that settles a man. The bow turned with the tide. The city spread itself behind us with smoke and tiny running shapes, and a single fire in the Barbican that had taken properly now, and threw a dull orange wash on the water. Out here, the sound changed. No banging metal, just distant sirens and the slap of small chop. For 1 long minute, we all stood and watched without speaking. Then the girl hiccuped and said something about wanting toast. Brenda told her we could do better than toast. She was a liar, but it worked. We took stock. Water, tins, a handful of blankets, flares, knives, fuel to move but not roam. People, me, Mick, Kim, Leon, Paul, his girl, her mum, Brenda, Baz. I looked back at the market, felt the gears grind behind my eyes. He was there. He was ours. We could not leave him to knock till his hands wore out. Mick saw that thought and didn't put a hand on me because he knew I would have shaken it off. He just nodded once and said we go back at first light, quick and clean, 2 aboard, 2 on the roof. He didn't say the other part. Kim did. If he's gone, she said, we do what needs doing. Her voice didn't wobble on the last word. Dawn brought fog, not thick, not a wall, a gauze that took the edges off. The infected on the quay moved slower in the cold. I decided that was true, even if it wasn't. We ran back along the wall in a half sneak, engine low, an otter passing a garden party. The market looked small and stubborn. The alley behind it looked emptier than it had any right to be. Leon stood with the forklift key in his fist and a look on his face like he had made peace with something unpleasant. We slid in, kissed the fenders, and tied off in 2 slick motions. The back door bolt slid with a noise that sounded like a bad idea. We opened a hand's width. The smell was cool and stale. No hospital tang now. I moved first because I had chosen that. The cupboard door had shifted against the crate, a little out. The bucket had tipped. The mop handle lay across the floor like an arrow. Baz was sitting on the chair. His hands were in his lap like a boy told to wait. His head was turned away. I said his name the way I would say it on a deck at 4 a.m., asking for the pliers. He turned, slow. His eyes were open and kind. Not there, though. Not properly. He made a small sound, no word in it, just air over a line. He stood, legs stiff like a man after a long drive. He stepped on the mop head and slid, and then recovered without noticing. He came forward because we were shapes that sunlight had made interesting. He reached his hands the way he used to when he wanted a roll-up off me. I could make a list of the things I hated in that moment, and it would fill a ledger. It was not hate for him, it was hate for the cheek of it all, that this was the choice, that we had not earned an easier one. Kim didn't wait for me to wobble. She stepped in at the side, gaff low, and hooked his belt and shifted him. She didn't stab. She didn't swing wild. She moved him. He stumbled, hit the mop bucket and half fell. I took the opening because hesitation is a gift to the wrong side. I put the boat hook under his chin and lifted like I was taking a good bass up and over a rail. His body went light in a way that says the mind has left. We eased him down. Kim held his head with one hand and spoke to him like he could hear. She called him a daft sod and told him his tab was cleared. That was as close to a blessing as we had in us. We did not make a show. We did not say prayers because every word used wrong that day would come back and sting. We wrapped him in a tarp from the store and we carried him between us through the alley. The 2 shapes at the end turned and then turned away again, drawn by some other small storm. The quay took him with its usual chilly grace. Water made its argument and then had him. We watched the spot for a count and then went back inside before the world could offer us a new item for the list. When we came out again with the crate, the high-vis man was there, jaw set, 2 mates with him who had not been with him before. He had a short piece of metal he had torn from the van. He said that the boats belonged to the community now, and that we should hand over the keys. He said it in a voice that suggests he had practiced the sentence overnight. Mick said no. He said it like he was telling a kid the tide was too strong to swim in. The man stepped forward and made a short, jerky swing that would have cracked Mick's cheek if Leon hadn't been there. Leon put him down with a pallet hook the way you put down a lobster that refuses to die right. No blood, no drama, just end of discussion. His mates looked at him, at us, at the alley. They did quick sums about numbers and guts and the distance to the harbour mouth. They backed away with their hands up, palms open, and then turned and walked. Not ran. Walked like men who wanted to keep what pride they had left without losing their teeth. Kim looked at Leon. He didn't meet her eye. He looked at the fork instead and made a fuss of putting its key back on a nail like any morning. Back aboard, we set to leave proper. The fog had thinned. The infected on the quay gathered at the sound of our engine and then got confused by the clang Leon arranged at the far shutter. We slipped past with backs hunched and eyes on our feet, like lads bunking school past a teacher's office. Out in clear water again, we turned for the anchorage and dropped the hook. The girl asked about school. Brenda said school was closed for now, and that anyone sensible would keep homework light in an emergency. That wrung a smile from the mum, even with her leg hurting. We made a small world on deck, a kettle on the hob, bread and tinned peaches, the sound of the chain taking up slack as the tide turned. Paul told his daughter a daft story about a crab who wanted to be a seabird, and he did voices for each character like an uncle at a wedding who wants to be liked. Kim checked the flares again and re-wrapped the good knives. Mick sat, elbows on knees, and watched the line of the breakwater with a look that said he was counting boats. I stood and did nothing for a minute and let my head catch up to my hands. Midday made the city bright and pointless. The ferry sat like a stranded car on a verge. A yacht tried the mouth and then thought better of it, sails slatting with a sloppy slap. The base sent another helo inland. The radio spat clipped words we couldn't do anything with. A Coastguard voice said, "Stay offshore," and we were offshore. So for once in our lives, we were doing what a Coastguard wanted when he said it the first time. That small victory felt silly and sweet. Leon asked about fuel, flat and practical. Mick set the numbers in a small pile. Enough to sit, not enough to roam. If we had to run, we would get as far as the next headland, and then be a floating caravan. The idea didn't scare me. It offended me, which is a cousin of fear but with better manners. We talked about water, about fishing for ourselves, and I felt the old craft rise like a tide. Fish when you must, not when you want. Work with what the sea gives, not what you order. It steadied me. On shore, people still moved. The infected still moved. The difference between the two got harder to see from this distance, which was a mercy. We saw a lifeboat finally, late afternoon, not from our boathouse, but a smaller one from down the coast. She came in fast, spun a tight circle, shouted something I couldn't catch, then arrowed away again, making a reef of white water in her wake. The sight of that orange hull under a grey sky made my chest loosen a notch. Someone was doing a job right somewhere. Sun slid down the side of the day. The fire on the Barbican guttered and flared like an argumentative couple. The fog came back in dirty scarves. Our little boat moved to her own small music, chain clinking, fittings murmuring, water speaking to wood. We made sleeping spaces where we could. No one complained. Kim took first watch with me. She leaned on the rail and stared at the breakwater. "If this holds 2 days," she said, "we'll see boats come from the villages. People think water means safe. I said water means options, and trouble in equal measure." She nodded. "And all the old debts come due," she added, and there was a weight to that I didn't want to poke. Night again. We kept the lights low. The infected did not love the dark, or perhaps I wanted that to be true. Either way, they seemed quieter. The sky filled with stars that the city rarely let us see. It felt rude to be comforted by them, with smoke still lifting from the roofs. I let the comfort in anyway, like smuggling a cake into a diet day. I told myself Jackie would be at her sister's with the dog. Telly turned up, waiting for my text that couldn't get through. I pictured her telling me off for worrying, and then making tea. I made that picture carefully, and filed it like a chart. Just before midnight, a dinghy bumped our stern in a soft, sneaky way. We swung a torch and found a lad of about 14 crouched in it, oars across his knees, eyes big, lips cracked. He didn't cry out or wave. He just looked at us, and waited like a stray dog at the back step. Kim hauled him aboard without asking any questions and tucked him under a blanket and put a mug in his hands. He said his name was Ollie and that he had come from across the water, and that his dad had told him to head for the big boats. He did not mention his dad again. We didn't push. Ollie watched the horizon like he expected it to spit his house back out intact. He asked what the rules were on our boat. I told him the rules were, "Listen, do your bit, and don't shout unless it's worth it." He nodded solemn, like a sea cadet. He fell asleep in the middle of Kim's sentence about not touching knives without asking. Children sleeping mid-instruction always makes me soft. I tucked the blanket under his feet so it wouldn't ride up. Brenda saw and gave me that look women over 60 have for men who manage to be useful once in a while. An hour later, a larger boat came out from the marina mouth. 3 men aboard. One with a long stick that wasn't a boat hook. Not a gun. A crowbar lodged into a handle. They kept low. They saw us and angled over. Mick stood, arms loose, hands visible. "We're fine," he called. "Keep your fuel." They slid closer than I liked. I caught the eye of the man on the bow. It had that gambler's glitter. He asked about spare diesel. Mick said no. The man looked at our anchor chain, at the number of bodies aboard, at the knives laid in a neat row by the wheel. He smiled without humor, and then peeled away, making a point of spraying our bow with a little arc of water. He wanted to leave something in the air. Message received. We set a horn trick again, when sounds rose from the quay. Leon tapped the deck with a spanner in a pattern that made me think of old fish auction bells. The infected bunched at the wrong spot and stared at nothing. It felt wicked. It felt necessary. The girl woke once and asked if the stars meant anything. Brenda said the stars mean plenty, and the trick is to decide what you want them to mean and hold to it. That is the sort of wisdom you can carry in a pocket. Near dawn, the radio came alive with something that was not Coastguard. A man with a calm Devon voice spoke from a trawler off Sulcombe. He said he had 20 aboard and would take no more. He said he was heading for the headland at Slack, and then along the coast to a cove with a name I have loved since I was 6, and first heard my dad say it. He spoke the name like a promise. If you're light and seaworthy, come. If you're heavy and angry, stay away. That line nearly made me laugh. It also made me decide our morning. We lifted the chain at grey light. The links came up oily and sure. The bow nudged round. The girl held Ollie's hand without comment. Paul tightened the strap on a life jacket that had seen more summers than sense. Kim stood at the rail with her gaff and her mouth set in a line that didn't say brave, didn't say scared, just said present. Mick took the wheel and did what he always did at the start of a day. He looked at water, at sky, at shore, and found a line between them that a boat could live on. We passed the breakwater with the lighthouse on our right like a quiet witness. The city sat behind us, smoke in low folds, lights blinking out, then back, then dying again. The infected on the quay made slow theatre in the margins. A dog trotted along the wall, alone and businesslike. We put our bow towards the headland and trimmed for a steady sea. The boat leaned into work with relief. Boats hate waiting as much as fighting men do. When they move, they find themselves again. Out beyond the breakwater, we met 2 more boats with faces like ours. Tired eyes, set mouths, hands never far from tools. We exchanged nods, nothing more. It was the sort of nod you give on a path in Dartmoor, when the fog lifts enough to see a stranger who has also decided to walk on. We fell into a loose line, not a fleet, not a convoy, just similar decisions made at the same time. The water changed color under the shallows. A cormorant dived and came up with nothing, and looked offended. Life had not agreed to stop because we were having a crisis. As the headland grew, so did the shape of the day. We had made it through the first light and the first dark of the thing. We had done cruel jobs and kind ones. We had used our hands for both. That balance hurt and comforted in equal measure. I stood at the rail and watched the sea slap our bow in little flares, and thought about the market behind us, about Baz, about the way Kim's jaw set when she decided to carry the heavy end, about Leon's quiet strike, about Brenda's hand on a stranger's shoulder, about Mick's stubborn charts unrolling in his head like old film. The radio gave one last burst from the coast. If you can float, float. If you can work, work. If you need saving, find patience. It sounded like something my mum would have stitched on a tea towel if she had been the sort to do that. I breathed the salt and diesel and watched the line where sea meets sky. We did not cheer. We did not cry out. We trimmed a little, and we kept the bow true, and we went. That's all for now. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to like and subscribe to keep the stories alive. For now, stay quiet, stay vigilant, and stay alive. Jack's Nightmares, signing off. Until next time, survivor.